Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Beyond Us Games, and in this tutorial what I'm going to be going over is source control and how to get it set up inside of GameMaker Studio 2. Now, if you're not familiar with source control, I'm going to give you just a very brief rundown about what it is and why you should be using it. Source control is a way of backing up your project through revisions and having access to every single one of those and seeing all of the changes made over time. And that is the most basic explanation of it. There is a huge amount of things that you can do with source control beyond just revision control. Now, why would you want to use source control? Well, the most obvious reason is that it allows you to back up your project remotely and then be able to look at every minute change that has happened along the way. This can be extremely useful if you're working on something and you find that you have encountered an error or a bug, or that you no longer like the system that you are working with and the way you're implementing it. You can go to your source control and you can look back a week, 2 weeks, 2 years and say, this is the spot where I decided to make that change. Let's revert back to it. And you just pull that down, and now your project has been freed from all of those changes, everything you did before that, or I guess after that. So that is source control in a nutshell. And we are going to get it set up, and I'm going to show you how to get it working, how to push, pull, commit, stage changes, do all of these things, all of these source control terminology. I'll explain them as we go. But I'll also show you a really cool feature of using branches so that when you want to test out a feature in your game, you can make a new branch, switch to that, and then anything you do inside of that new branch will not affect your old projects. So you can have your master project running along one branch and any testing you want to do on another, and you can switch between those super easily, super conveniently. So with that being said, let's dive into it. The first thing you're going to need is Git, G-I-T. If you just search for Git, this will be one of the first things that will pop up on any engine that you search in. So I'm going to go for downloads for Windows, as I am using Windows, and this will automatically start downloading it. Now, if you have a different operating system or a different bit version of Windows, you can see right here that it gives you alternatives to download. And if you're on a Mac, you can also build that here. You can grab the source code, or if you just want to learn more about Git or try using it online, they actually have a Try Git here. And you can see all the companies that are using Git because it is very useful and very powerful. So once it has downloaded, we're going to click on it and open it up. And it's going to have a lot of options as we are installing it. So I'm going to click next on this first one, install it in its default location. And I'm going to click yes. I've already had Git on here. I'm just going to click next again, next again. And now this option, the first one that it gives you of which path environment, I'm going to say use Git from Git bash only. This is a personal preference. You don't have to change it. I prefer their Git command as opposed to Windows command prompt, but that's just me. Everything else is the default options for your system. Unless you know what you're doing, I'd recommend just clicking next, 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 and letting it do what it does. Okay? So once you've done that, it's going to install, and there are a couple different ways to use Git on your system. The primary one that we will be using is Git bash, which is their command line. If you've never used a command line, don't worry. I'm going to walk you through every single code, every single command that you will need to type, and I'll show you a really cool way to access your project without having to navigate through the command using change directory and all of that. So we don't need to use this right now though, so I'm just going to finish that, and that is now installed. If I type Git on my Windows machine, you can see here that there is Git bash, GUI, and command. Great. Now, once you've done that, you need to actually choose where you're going to be storing your source control, where you're going to be storing your project. You can do it locally, but that defeats a lot of the advantages that you get from using source control, which is backing it up online and having team cooperation. So with that, there are two options that are very popular. There is Bitbucket and there is GitHub. Both of these are great. They offer a lot of options and customization. I've used both of them. Personally, I'm going to stick with Bitbucket as it has private repositories And a repository is simply a place, simply your code, your project, the place that you're actually putting your code. It has private repositories for free. GitHub does not, which means that it is off the table for me, as I am storing personal projects and game projects that I don't want other people to access. So you can click on Get Started up here, and then you can create your account. Go ahead and do that. I've already made an account, so I'm actually just going to click on Login. When you make an account, you will need to verify your email, and then it will come up with a page that says you can create a new flying solo repository or create a team. What you're going to do is create a new repository simply for yourself, and I can do that from here as well. If I click on Create Repository, we're actually going to end up at the exact same screen. I am going to name this Test Project. Access level will be private, and we're going to use Git. There are advanced settings, but I don't want to cover that right now. So I'm going to create this repository, and now we actually have a place online to store our project, which is good. The only thing that we need from here is actually to come up to SSH and copy this. So this is what we're going to use in a minute. So just make sure you have access to this SSH and HTTPS version and copy that over. We're going to come back to this in just a minute. But first, we're going to come into GameMaker Studio 2. Now, to use source control, we need to set it up in two different places. The first one is going to be in File, Preferences, Plugins, Source Control. Inside of here, we are actually going to be telling it where we want to send it and the credentials that we have to submit it to there. So this information, you want to do basically the same thing that you just set up on Bitbucket or GitHub, whichever one. So username is going to be BeyondUsGames, as that's what I'm going to set up. Email is beyondusgames@gmail.com, and of course you'd use your own here. Now you can do user pass or SSH key pair authentication. For simplicity, we're going to use user pass as it doesn't require public and private keys, which generating those and getting them put into your repository can be much more complicated and time consuming. So here is where we're going to put that SSH directory that we copied. We're going to put our username and the password that we used to log in to Bitbucket or GitHub, whichever one you chose. And then we don't need to worry about any of this except verbose logging I'm going to put on so that we have detailed logging. I'm going to click Apply and OK. Come into Options, Main, and near the bottom here, we're going to click Enable Source Control. Apply, OK. Now, there is a new options menu up here called Source Control. This allows us to then use source control functions inside of GameMaker Studio. Now, before we do that, we're going to open up Git Bash, and I have an account on here, so I'm going to log into it. You may not, though. You may prompt you to set one up. But what we need to do is actually configure your username and your email that Git will recognize as you push changes to your repository. Now, when you push a change, that means you are actually saying, take all the information that I have set up and put it online and store it there. And so we're going to use a couple of commands here to set up our username and our email. This is going to be git config -- global user.name. I'm going to put in BeyondUsGames because that's what I set up inside of GameMaker Studio 2. I'm going to say git config -- global user.email. And I'm going to put my email in there. Now, to make sure that this is set up correctly, you can type in git config -- list. And at the very bottom here, it's going to have your username and your user email. It's going to have a lot of other information. Don't worry about that right now. So if you have set those properly, they will be right there, which is great. So let's close out of this. And now we're going to do magic. Not really. We're going to click on Source Control, and we're going to create Project Repository. Now, this project repository is specifically being created inside of our GameMaker Studio 2 project on our local machine. So if we navigate to that, I've got mine right here. Normally, it's in Documents, GameMaker Studio 2, and then the name of your project. you're going to now see a .git folder. Well, you might see it. I have view hidden folders on mine. If you don't, you won't see it. This is going to contain all of the information for pulling data, pushing data, and everything else related to source control. So with that, now we can actually start doing source control. How we're going to do that is we're going to right-click inside of our project folder, and this is important. You need to be inside of your GameMaker Studio 2 folder, right-click, and open up Git Bash. You can see here that this is now inside of that folder. If you are familiar with the command prompt, you will know that most of the time you have to be inside of the folder that you want to do things in. And that involves changing directory, viewing lists, typing out paths. This gets rid of all that. If you right-click inside of the folder, open up Git Bash, it opens it up right there. The same can also be done in Windows command prompt, which is kind of cool. So with that, now we can get ready. So we are here, and I'm going to keep this open, just minimize it for now. So we're going to come up to source control and go to commit changes. Now we have a long list of unstaged changes, and that actually corresponds to this orange exclamation mark over here next to the room and options. If it has an orange exclamation, that means that something about it has been changed, whether the code, variables in it, or it has been created. And if it has that, that means that it needs to be staged and pushed so that it is backed up properly. So we're going to click on Stage All, and this is actually our entire GameMaker Studio 2 project. Down here is the commit message. I would highly recommend you use this as it tells you in a short, brief message exactly what happened. So I'm going to say created project, set up, source control. And when I click commit, this all turns green, and now it's not actually in Bitbucket yet. If we were to open up Bitbucket, press F5 to refresh it, nothing's actually here yet. Even though we have committed it and we have done that, it's not ready because we have to push it. Now, to push it, we have to do one more thing inside of Git Bash. We have to open up our Bitbucket right here and say, I have an existing project, and follow these commands right here. Now, if you're familiar with source control at all, you could try git push, but it's not going to work because we haven't specified where we're actually pushing it to. So there's two stages. There's committing, saying, I'm gathering everything up, this is all that's going to be saved. And then there's pushing, which is actually pushing that to your remote server where it's being stored. And you have to tell it where that is going to be. So right here, we're just going to copy, Control-C, right-click, paste, then I'm going to press Enter. So that adds the origin, which is the master branch, which is where it's going to be stored. And then we're going to say copy this, open this up, right-click and paste, and now we're going to push to that master branch. It's going to show a couple of different things here, that it's working, that it's connected, and now it has successfully completed. So if I open up test project here, we're going to see I have created the repository and I have pushed that there. And if I click on this commit, there is some really cool information. You can see my comment, but then you can see every single thing that changed. Now, because we made the project and this is the very first commit, everything was changed, but you can see here that it has the source code for everything that we had. Even the GameMaker Studio 2 files, which is really neat. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look at this closer. But this is where it starts becoming cool and very useful. Inside of GameMaker Studio 2, we can now create objects and sprites, name them whatever we want. You can see those have the exclamation marks. Inside of our room, we'll set this to persistent. I'll save, and then it knows that that needs to be committed. So in source control, we're going to come up to commit. Everything's already staged. We're going to say created a sprite and object, changed room to persistent. Commit, open this up, and now the only command you have to do is git push. And it's going to push it to the branch that you are currently working on. and I'll address branches in just a second. But you can see that works, and that's the only command you need. Now, if you'd like to use the Git GUI, you can. I just wouldn't recommend it for GameMaker Studio 2, as it requires that you put another commit message in there. This is the best way to do it without having to redo steps and make it a little more confusing, in my personal opinion. So now, if we open this up again, I'm going to press F5, and we're going to look at commits. And you can see there is a second commit with the message, and then you can actually see exactly what was changed. If we scroll down and we find the room, you can see here that persistent was false, and now it is true. So that's how you can kind of see what has changed and what is new and what's different. So that's all you have to do. If you just use source control for this, you have a backup, a revision history, and a way to pull your project down wherever you are working on it, so that if your local machine dies or something happens to it, you have it completely backed up and you can access it from anywhere in the world, which is awesome. But I want to show you, in my opinion, a really cool feature that comes along with this. So I'm going to click on branches. Now, imagine a tree. It has a branch and it has a lot of branches, right? In GameMaker Studio 2, the way we're going to visualize this is the project that we are currently working on is our master branch. So this right here, with all of its changes, whatever is inside of here, this is the master branch. Now, if we want to try implementing a new feature in our game or try coding something differently, instead of saving your game as several different projects, we're going to make a new branch. And that branch is going to be off of the master one. That way it has all of the information from the master, but then when we go and make changes, those changes will only affect the created branch. And we'll be able to switch between those with no interference and no loss of data. So we're going to create a branch right here. We're going to call this testing. We're going to create, and now it has made that branch. You can make a branch inside of inside of the git bash as well by typing git checkout -b and then the name of that. So if I typed testing 2, we now have created that and we have switched to it. And now to pull the branch that we created inside of Bitbucket, we need to say git pull. And this is going to pull any changes that we made on that server, which the change we made was to create that branch. Now we can switch to it by saying git checkout testing. And you can see here at the end that we are now on testing. And if I type git branch, it's going to list all 3 of those. So now we have 2 extra branches. But what does that mean? It means that if we open up GameMaker Studio and we delete all of that, so we've made changes, we've done something, and I say save, go to commit, stage, deleted everything. I commit, I open up git and say git push. It is only making these changes on this one branch, and that's it. So now we have nothing inside of here, but if I say git checkout master, we have switched to the master branch. And all we have to do is go back into our project, wait just a second, and everything is here. This allows you to test out anything you want with your game while maintaining just one project and having all of it in one place. Inside of our repository, we now have different branches and we have different commits on those branches. So it's a beautiful thing. It allows you to do incredible things while maintaining one project, an awesome history, and the ability to go back and look at every single change, modification, addition, deletion, whatever, in a uniform, easy-to-read way. Source control is invaluable once you begin working on something that is larger or something that is highly important to you. When you are just working on smaller projects, you don't need to set up a repository and source control for it. It's not important as if you're working on a personal project that you hope will make you money, or that you want to really, really work on, and that if you lost it, it would mean, serious grieving for you. Source control is awesome, and I have just touched on the bare minimum of what it can do. If you want to learn more, there are great resources out there. So I highly recommend you diving into them and learning how to use them. I've taught you the very basics of Git Bash, and just enough that you can use it to use source control, change branches, and so on and so forth. So, that's source control. Super helpful, super useful. I use it, the professionals use it, and I highly recommend that you use it as well. That's all I've got for you today, though. Thank you for joining me, and as always, have fun making great games, and I will talk to you later. If you find the content on my channel useful and you like it, consider supporting me on Patreon. All of the people on the screen are doing so, and they are awesome, and they get rewards, and you can join them. So, thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day.